don't know how else I can say it, guys. I've said it 3 different occasions. Coach, I think I've said this over and over and over. Well, then I guess I have to say it. I'm not going to be the Alabama coach. I'm not going to be the Alabama coach. I'm not going to be the Alabama coach. I'm not going to be the Alabama coach.
Alabama wins its 13th national championship at the Rose.
On January 10, 2024, Alabama head coach Nick Saban announced his retirement from coaching. Saban, the man hated by every college football fan base in the country, except for one at least. The guy who struck fear in his opponents. A man with such laser focus and competitiveness that even the greatest achievement in college football doesn't satisfy him. Just seeing this guy smile is a news story in itself. Love him or hate him, most would agree that he's one of the greatest college football coaches of all time. He's in the top 5 for all-time wins in college football, coaching during arguably the most competitive time in college football. He's the winner of 7 national championships. Nick Saban taking the Alabama job completely changed the landscape of the game, and I believe his retirement will also greatly change it as well. If you can't respect what this guy has done in this sport, then you have no business being a part of it. We all have our reasons to either adore or loathe Nick Saban. Growing up a Gator fan, I've hated Nick Saban ever since the day he made my childhood hero cry. You know, it's hard to mentally recover from something like that as a 13-year-old, and I've held on to that feeling ever since. Regardless, I understood that he was an elite coach, and I decided to dive into the life of the man that Alabama fans call their Dark Lord, Nick Saban, to see what made this guy a champion. This video will be part 1 of a 3-part series that I'm making on one of the great coaches in sports. You're watching the College Football History Channel, and this is Nick Saban. I initially was only going to make one video about Nick Saban, giving a general overview of his career with football. Once I started my research, I came across 2 books that grabbed my attention. The first one was a book called 4th and Goal, Every Day by Phil Savage. Savage is a guy who worked for Saban and Bill Belichick while they coached the Browns in the 90s. Savage would end up having many roles in the NFL. His biggest role was probably as general manager for the Cleveland Browns. From 2009 to 2017, he was Alabama's color commentator. This book goes into detail about Nick Saban's famous process of coaching football and building a great program. The next book I read was called Saban, The Making of a Coach by Monty Burke. This is a biography about Nick Saban's life, and it's the main reason that I decided to make a multi-part video about him. Like most topics I discuss on this channel, I didn't know a lot about Saban going into this. This book had so much information about him that I didn't think one video would do him justice. I'm going to refer to this book as Burke's book during the video, so I don't have to say the title every time. Almost all the information I'm presenting in these videos is from these 2 books. I'm going to try my best not to just straight up plagiarize both of them, but the stories they shared were so good that it's going to be hard for me not to. If you're someone who thinks that Saban is just some old school hard A who only cares about football, well, you'll probably still think that after watching this. But I honestly believe that there's a reason for how obsessive he is to the game, and I'm positive that many of you will come out of this with a greater appreciation for the old Bama coach. Now, if you had to guess when someone named the Dark Lord was born, what date would you guess? Hilariously, Nick Saban was born on October 31st, 1951. You got that right. Saban was born on Halloween, the spookiest day there is, and he would make it his mission to haunt college football forever. He was born in Fairmont, West Virginia, to Mary and Nick Saban Sr. A lot of gritty football stars have come from this area of West Virginia. NFL Hall of Famers Sam Huff and Frank Gotsky were born near Saban. Sam Huff was born about 13 miles north of Fairmont in Edna. Frank Gotsky was born in Farmington, about 7 miles west. Coach Rich Rodriguez and Jimbo Fisher were also born near Saban. Rodriguez was born in Grantown, about 9 miles north of Fairmont, and Jimbo was born in Clarksburg, around 20 miles south of Fairmont. Probably the most famous coach of the group before Saban was Fielding Yost, who was born in Fairview, about 11 miles northwest of Fairmont. I made a video about Fielding Yost that you can watch, that I'll link in the description going over his career. Coal mines ruled over these parts of West Virginia, creating tough and hardened young men. Nick Saban's father was known by everyone in the area as Big Nick. He was a very serious person who grew up never wanting his family to work in the dangerous coal mines that had negatively affected most of the people he knew. Big Nick was a good athlete, and he grew up playing football and baseball. He would later even play some minor league ball. He would eventually join the Navy and return home to West Virginia to open up a vehicle service station. He and his family lived in a small house directly behind the service station. They also ran a Dairy Queen across the street from the service station at one point. Nick Saban Jr. would work a lot for his dad. For this video, I'm going to call Nick Sr. Big Nick and Nick Jr. Nick. Big Nick was known around town for having a huge temper, and he was very hard on his kids, especially his only son Nick. Nick Saban's eventual wife Terry once told a Miami newspaper, "People think Nick is so tough, even to the point that they think he doesn't have social skills and he can't tell a joke." Well, multiply that by 100 and you'll understand his dad. If people visited the Saban house, he would straight up ignore them, sometimes just walking to another room. Saban has spoken a lot about working for his dad. He would have to do things like fill up the gas, check the oil, and wash the cars. Big Nick would come out there, and if there was even a spot on the car, he would make him start over. This is how most tasks or chores Saban did went. In an SEC Network documentary, Saban said that every day at dinner, there would be a reckoning where Big Nick would interrogate Saban on his chores that day. Did you cut the grass? Did you clean the mower? Did you do this? Did you do that? If Saban did anything incorrectly, he would have to go fix it. His peers noticed that he always tried his best to please his dad and would be perfect around him. The more I read about their relationship, the more I could see Saban's personality start to take shape. His dad is likely a large reason why Saban always strives to be perfect and is addicted to the process of doing things the right way. Life was rough in these small mining towns of West Virginia. As a way to help the community and his son, Big Nick helped start a Pop Warner team with his buddy. He set it up to be coached by a couple of local college kids. When they didn't show up to the first couple practices, Big Nick took it upon himself to be the coach of the team. After running a few practices, he realized that he loved coaching and he started taking it very seriously. He named the team the Ida Mae Black Diamonds because he didn't want young kids walking or hitchhiking through the rough West Virginia terrain to get to practice. He got a bus that he used to pick up players for practice and then take them home. This would incentivize more boys to come to practice. But in true Saban fashion, it also gave Big Nick more control over the team. This is something you'll see come out through Saban as an adult. It sometimes seems like he has to have complete control over his situation, or he isn't happy. He would make practice as long as he wanted and make sure that the players actually showed up. In a move that would never fly today, he also didn't allow parents to come to practices. This is pretty insane to think about, but it was the 60s, so maybe the parents were fine with it. Inside the bus, Big Nick's wife Mary decorated the interior with motivational sayings for the kids. Big Nick had never coached before, and there were a lot of learning curves as they only won one game in their first season. By year 3 though, they started doing very well and would continue to dominate for the rest of the time Big Nick coached them. They even got the attention of West Virginia head coach Bobby Bowden. Once the program was more established, Bowden would stop at practices to ask Big Nick about former Black Diamond players that he was recruiting. They had a friendly relationship throughout Big Nick's time coaching. There were a few important people on Saban's Black Diamond team who grew up playing with him. One was his best friend, Kerry Marbury. They remained friends as adults as well. Kerry was African American, and the town they lived in was segregated. Kerry and Saban were kind of ignorant of it as kids though. In Burke's book, Kerry said he hadn't really felt racism before until he got to college. 2 other players on the team, Charlie Miller and Nate Stevens, would later be drafted by NFL teams. The quarterback of the team would be none other than the coach's son himself, Nick Saban. Saban wasn't the most athletic player on the team by a mile. He wasn't very tall or fast. He didn't have a strong arm either, but he was probably one of the smartest players on the team, and because of his desire to please his dad, he was the most disciplined player on the team as well. While reading, I kind of imagined him like the quarterback from Friday Night Lights. The silent, gritty guy that kind of just toughed it out each game and the whole team respected. He studied football very hard and was always prepared for games. Given the down and distance, in almost any situation, he knew what to do. And this was just in Pop Warner. The Saban we know today was sculpted while on this Pop Warner team to be the greatest coach of all time. Saban also started honing in on his recruiting skills during this time. In Savage's book, 4th and Goal Every Day, he talked about how Saban would recruit local kids to join the team. He would say things like, "Come play for us and we can teach you how to play and get you prepared for your high school team." He also enticed them with ice cream, which has to be the Pop Warner version of an NIL deal. Big Nick was tough on the entire team. One player said, "We feared him. You'd be in the huddle just waiting for the kick in the butt or the clipboard to come flying at you." Like many dads who coached their sons, Big Nick was hardest on his son. Marbury says in the book that he felt sorry for Nick and that Big Nick was much more demanding of him than he was for the rest of the players. Another player said they didn't remember him even finishing an entire practice without crying. This may sound crazy, but it doesn't sound all that different from the interactions I've witnessed between my coaches and their sons. Their practices were extremely difficult, filled with big hits and lots of conditioning. Kerry and Saban have both been on record talking about the hill they used to have to run up for conditioning. When it got dark out, Big Nick would make each player bring a leaf down from one of the trees at the top of the hill as proof that they made it to the top. Burke describes how the practices were no nonsense, and that to Big Nick, football was not supposed to be fun. This was a teaching tool, and a way of turning the boys into disciplined men. This seems like it's almost a mirror image of Saban's approach to coaching throughout his career. Their hard work paid off though, and when Saban was in 7th grade, the Black Diamonds won all of their games, with no one scoring a single point on them all year. This would spark a 39-game win streak for him. Big Nick took his coaching position very seriously. I feel like a lot of the times, when a player's dad is the coach, they're hard on their kid, and that player usually battles hard with their parent and gets burnt out with whatever sport they're playing. Nick Saban was the opposite. He wanted to impress his father, and he worked very hard and took things very seriously, even at a young age. His friends remember him as someone who was always working and never wasting time. He did seem to have fun though playing football. It was the one thing he and his dad could bond over. They would talk ball and spend their nights watching film together. Big Nick continued to coach the Black Diamonds even after Saban was in high school. During that time, they even beat a highly ranked team twice, led by none other than a young Joe Montana. For high school, Saban went to Monongah High, a 300-person school. He made the football team, but didn't start immediately. Remember, he was kind of undersized. They got beat pretty badly though in their first game of the season, and supposedly, the captains of the team went to the coach and made him switch to QBs. They knew they had a kid who was an experienced QB for their local elite Pop Warner program for the past few seasons. He had already earned a reputation as an intelligent leader. Saban also played DB on the team. He was known as a player who was calm, cool, and collected. He understood the game better than everyone else. On offense and defense, he was a headhunter, always putting his body on the line. The team wouldn't lose another game with him at quarterback for the rest of that season, going 8-1-1. Burke said that Saban would receive a general game plan from his coach before the games, but that once the game started, he called all of his own plays. I'm not sure what year he started doing this, but it's crazy to think that a sophomore was smart enough to run his own offense successfully in high school. What's also crazy to me is that they were primarily a run team, so this high school kid was selfless enough and disciplined enough not to call plays designed for himself in order to win the game. After games, he and Big Nick would go over more film. This is in the late 60s, by the way. Most of these kids don't have access to film. Saban was that far ahead of his peers in terms of how he studied the game at an early age. He was all business in the games. When they scored or had a good play, he wasn't cheering or jumping up and down. He played like it was his job. Kerry was also on the team at running back, and he was one of the best players on the team. Their junior year, they made it to the state championship, but lost to Coroto Canova. They would make it again in their senior season and win 21-12. Saban played in that game with a broken ankle. He was also a good basketball and baseball player in high school, making the all-state teams for both. Saban was all business as a student too. He took his studies seriously and made great grades. Once when Saban was younger, he got in trouble for not singing in a music class and getting a bad grade. Big Nick drove Saban to a coal mine near their Pop Warner field and took his son down into the mine. He told him, if you don't do better in school, if you don't get a college education, this is where you'll end up. High school is also where Saban met his future wife, Terry. I'm going to go ahead and anoint Terry as the most famous and important college football coach's wife of all time. This will make more sense in my other videos, but some of the stories involving her and Saban's career are insane. Terry was a dancer for a rival high school. Her dance group was called the Honeybees, and she was the Queen Bee, which is one of the leaders of the dancers and the band. They started dating in high school and are still together today. Saban graduated high school in 1969. He got a recommendation from a West Virginia senator to go to the U.S. Naval Academy. He ended up withdrawing his application, not wanting to potentially be involved in the war in Vietnam. He didn't have a ton of options with big schools though, as an undersized player. Even Saban today would tell you that grit and intelligence can only get you so far. Big-time coaches are looking for that, coupled with size and skill. He got offers from Ohio University, Miami of Ohio, and Kent State. He ended up choosing Kent State. They were technically the worst of the three teams, but he felt the most comfortable with the small Ohio school. He ended up playing baseball at Kent State too. His best friend, Kerry Marbury, ended up playing for West Virginia. He had moments where he was great there, but left after 2 years. For a time, he held the single-game rushing record at West Virginia, with 291 yards rushing during a game in 1971. He didn't have a great relationship with head coach Bobby Bowden and left to go play in the Canadian Football League and World Football League. Kerry and Nick remained great friends throughout their lives, and they both served as each other's best men in their weddings. Kerry died in 2019. His cause of death at the time was unknown, but he was suffering from terminal cancer around that time. The year before Saban got to Kent State, they had gone 1-9. They were a bad football team. He played on the freshman team starting out and soon realized he was too small to play quarterback. He started playing primarily safety and transitioned to only playing defense. Kent State went 5-5 that season. Even as a college student, Saban remained very serious and dedicated to what he did. On most days, he performed the same routine. He'd go to class, then practice, then worked out at the gym, shot hoops, and finally studied. He wasn't living it up or goofing off. This was a job to him. He also was supposedly one of the only white athletes at the time who hung out with both black and white players. According to his teammate Phil Witherspoon, Nick was really blind to color. And this was during a time of some real racial unrest in the country. I always noticed that there seemed to be no difference for him. After his first season, a pretty big thing happened at Kent State. On May 4th, 1970, during the final week of his freshman year, the Kent State riots occurred. There had been a few protests on the days leading up to May 4th from students opposing the United States involvement in Vietnam. A few days before the protest, Richard Nixon gave a speech stating that the U.S. was going to increase its involvement in Cambodia, sending many young people in the U.S. to what they felt was a random country to potentially die. The National Guard was called in because the issue was getting very heated. By May 4th, the Ohio governor banned demonstrations completely, which only outraged the students even more. 3,000 people gathered in the Kent State Commons that day, again to protest. Once things started to get even more intense, the National Guard threw tear gas into the crowd and advanced with bayonets on their rifles to push the crowd back. While they did this though, some of the guardsmen fired shots, some in the air and some directly into the crowd. 4 students were killed. 2 of them were just bystanders at the protest. 9 other students were wounded. This sparked more outrage in the country, leading to even more protests about the war, and it made the Vietnam situation even worse. Leading up to the riots, Kent State football coach David Puddington could sense that something bad was going to happen and told the team not to go to the rally and to stay away from large groups. For the most part, that happened. A little bit before the violence of the protest started, Saban met with his teammate Witherspoon after they had just gotten out of class. Witherspoon wanted to go to the riots. Saban suggested that they go eat lunch first. Saban and Witherspoon walked out of the cafeteria about 5 minutes after the shots were fired and saw chaos. Saban has talked about this a few times in the past, still remembering seeing pools of blood from the dead or wounded. Kent State closed their campus immediately after this, and all students were instructed to go home. The next season had some weird vibes due to the traumatic events that had taken place. Kent State didn't do great and went 3-7. Coach Puddington would leave the program stating that a major reason was because the prevailing contagious negativism on campus and in the community. Saban spent that year learning how to play strong safety for the next season. After Puddington left, Kent State hired Don James. James had been an assistant at some big schools like Florida State, Michigan, and Colorado. This was his first shot at being a head coach. He brought more discipline and organization to the team, something Saban probably loved. Their conditioning was more rigorous, and there were new standards that the team had to abide by. In Saban's junior season, they still didn't do too hot and only went 3-8, but one of those wins included a big upset against NC State to start the season. That winter break, Saban married Terry, and they moved in together, both attending Kent State. Going into the 1972 season, the Golden Flashes had talent. At linebacker, they had Jack Lambert, who would later be an NFL Hall of Famer. They had Gary Pinkel at tight end, who was later a big-time football coach. They had future gold medalist Gerald Tinker at receiver. Saban was a tough player and studied film every chance he had. Their quarterback, Greg Kokel, even says in Burke's book that Jack Lambert had better skills, but Nick was tougher. The start of the season was still not great. They started 1-3-1. Kokel remembers during a loss to San Diego State, he threw a pick and Saban came over, picked him up off the field and said, "Get off your ass and quit feeling sorry for yourself." On October 28th, they played against Northern Illinois, one of the first teams to use AstroTurf in college football. Saban broke his ankle during the game, causing him to miss the rest of the season. Kent State won its next 3 games though, and earned a MAC title for the first time in school history. By now, Saban thought his time with football was done, and he started making plans to come home and run a car dealership after graduation. The problem though was that he still needed to wait on Terry to graduate from Kent State, and didn't want to go back home without her. So he was stuck at Kent State, looking for something to do. His coach Don James convinced him to help with the defensive backs as a graduate assistant. To make money on the side, Saban loaded trucks at night and drove a truck for Coca-Cola that summer. Before I move on from Saban's playing career, there's a tragic but also kind of hilarious story Burke shares from Saban's roommate, Steve Broderick. He said that after one holiday break, Saban returned to school telling him that his dad, Big Nick, thought he was getting a little too big for his britches. so his dad supposedly cleared out the bedroom and tossed Nick some boxing gloves. Nick told Broderick that he thought Big Nick was joking, but the next thing he knew, he was defending himself. Nick said that he wouldn't have ever fought his dad, and his dad beat him to a pulp. As a grad assistant, Saban helped out with the secondary and was the defensive coordinator for the freshman team. He also did on-campus recruiting and assisted with evaluating recruits on film. Saban as a coach now is very well known for his ability to evaluate recruits. This is something we will go more in depth on in later videos. He was also in charge of getting their film developed, which required him to drive an hour to the Pittsburgh Steelers facility. Saban would take advantage of the trips, meeting George Perles, the D-line coach. He would hang out and talk ball with the coaches. In Monty Burke's book, Perles was quoted saying, "He'd just hang around the team and watch film, and watch practice and talk to the coaches." Saban was even more intense as a coach. Kent State's quarterback Kokel said that Nick started getting on to him more about curfews. I said, "Nick, what happened? I miss getting to hang out with you." He told me, "Greg, the game's changed." Kent State started the 1973 season with a win over a good Louisville team. Saban called his dad, excited to tell him about the game. He told him that he thought coaching was something he wanted to pursue. This would be the last conversation Nick would have with his father. Big Nick had some heart issues around that time, and while jogging one day, he suffered a heart attack and passed away at 46 years old. Saban wanted to quit coaching after that and had come home to run a service station for his family. His mom was against the idea and made sure he continued working at his new passion. Many of Big Nick's former players attended his funeral. Bobby Bowden even offered Saban a position for his staff as a GA once he heard that Big Nick had died. He was quoted saying, "I didn't know him at all, but I knew his dad, and that was good enough for me." Big Nick was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Fairmont, where his gravestone reads, "No man stands as tall as when he stoops to help a child." He made it his life mission to prep the kids in his community for adulthood, and even though a lot of his methods may not be acceptable today, he positively impacted a lot of kids' lives. He definitely impacted Saban's life. I'll be pulling at strings a bit throughout this series about Saban's relationship with his dad, because of course I don't know exactly everything about his life. But in both Burke and Savage's book, they strongly hint how it sometimes seems that Saban's drive to be perfect in the process, and how he never seems happy after a big accomplishment, probably directly stems from him striving to be perfect for his father. As Burke would say in his book, there will always be a spot left on the car. The Black Diamonds Field in Idamay is now named Nick Saban Memorial Field. That's after Big Nick, not the Nick Saban we all know. It's one of the better kept places in town, and Saban has continued to donate money towards the program throughout his career. In Saban's first season as GA, Kent State went 9-2. They were even ranked 19th at one point. The next season they went 7-4. Don James was then hired by the University of Washington, leaving Saban at Kent State. Coach James would end up winning a national championship at Washington in 1991. His replacement at Kent State would be one of their assistant coaches named Dennis Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald hired Saban to coach linebackers for $8,000 a year, and Saban worked under him for 2 seasons. After that, Saban started to get what Burke called the itch. He started calling around trying to get bigger and bigger coaching positions. One of the schools he called was Syracuse, which was looking for a linebacker coach. He had Don James vouch for him to head coach Frank Maloney. Maloney was kinda crazy. It was known for doing things like throwing trash cans or other things when angry. Saban was hired for $14,500 to coach the outside linebackers and defensive ends. Saban stayed serious and stern at Syracuse, a common theme you'll see throughout his entire coaching career. The defensive coordinator at the time was Dennis Friesel. He was kind of the opposite of Saban. He was a funny extrovert who would get jacked up and do things like headbutt his players, even though he wasn't wearing a helmet. Syracuse would go 6-5 that season. After the 1977 season, a coach he knew, Frank Signetti, kept calling Saban, needing a new secondary coach. Saban was trying to ignore him at first and stay at Syracuse because he had just started there. But Signetti kept calling him. He and Terry also didn't really like where they were. It was cold and they were lonely in a new area. This is one of the first times you'll see the impact Terry has had on college football. Apparently, his wife was secretly talking to Signetti in the background during this time, urging him to keep calling her husband. Saban would end up taking the West Virginia job as a secondary coach, which was his position in college. Terry and Saban got to move back closer to home, and he was starting to become more confident as a coach. He was big on technique and being physical, according to Everett Pettaway, one of his cornerbacks. He would get in there and show the players exactly how to do their drills. He also did his best to become more personal with the players, checking in on them at their dorms, or inviting them over and having Terry cook for him. Fulton Walker, one of the defensive backs, was quoted in Burke's book saying that Terry was a great cook. The 1978 season did not go well. They went 2-9, and during the season, Cignetti fell ill, being diagnosed with cancer. Saban ended up taking on more responsibility because of it, and really got involved in the recruiting scene for the team. As someone who struggled with building social relationships in his day-to-day life, Saban was the opposite when it came to recruiting. He had a way of making recruits feel comfortable, especially black athletes during a time when many considered West Virginia a racist school. Everett Pettaway said that he didn't even consider going to West Virginia until Saban came after him. Pettaway said, "He spent a lot of time with me and made me feel comfortable. I had no worries about race or whether he or anyone else there favored players based on race." Saban was in charge of the Northern Ohio region for recruiting, an area dominated by Ohio State. Glenn Mason, an Ohio State assistant who recruited that area, said, "He gave us a run for our money there. He shouldn't even have been in our league. It was pretty impressive." During this time in college football, other team recruiters would hang out together in the mornings or at the end of the day, before or after they spent the day on the recruiting trail. One time, Mason recalls eating breakfast with Saban. He convinced Mason to go check out this 6'4", 280-pound O-lineman at a small high school out in the country. Mason decides that he's going to go check him out. Once he got there, he realized that this huge athlete was a scrawny 5'7" kid. When he called Saban later, Saban just started laughing hysterically on the phone. Their 1979 season was better than the prior year, but still not great. They went 5-7, and Cignetti would be fired. Saban had impressed some people though. Glenn Mason and the Ohio State staff decided they wanted to hire him. They convinced head coach Earl Bruce to go after Saban. At 28, this would be Saban's first big league position at one of the most popular programs in the country. And this is where we're going to leave off for part 1. Thank you for joining me in the first part of this series on Nick Saban. Make sure to stay tuned for part 2, where we start really diving into Nick Saban's coaching career and his path towards becoming one of the greatest head coaches of all time. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching the College Football History channel. If you like what you see, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can easily watch part 2 of this series. Feel free to reach out to share your thoughts or to share any suggestions for future episodes.